morning. It's 3 minutes after 10 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I hope you had a splendid weekend. I may bore you later about my adventures in restoring a lawn roller, which took up much of my weekend. Yes, I am feeling every one of my 50 years, and yes, I did derive an inordinate amount of pleasure from the stripping and the sanding and the scouring and then the priming and the painting of an old Victorian lawn roller that I happened to find. But I probably won't bore you with the details of that too early on in the programme, because there's quite a lot to get through today. I don't know whether we need a sound effect for this, Keith, but we're probably going to have a Brexit phone-in. I know you like to alert each other. I know you like to ring around, alert your family members, particularly the ones who are now finally, and inevitably, let's be kind, seeing the light and realising, even regretting the decision that they were persuaded by epic effort and expense. Never forget that if you're feeling impatient or unkind towards people who they will always bear a degree of responsibility for the completely self-inflicted catastrophes and crises that the country currently faces. Don't forget that the most rich and powerful men, I'd like to say in this country, but a lot of them are of course, non-doms. Rupert Murdoch only pops over to, doesn't even have a wife here anymore, does he? They're getting divorced. So, don't forget the amount of effort and expense that people like Rupert Murdoch and the owner of the Daily Mail and the owner of the Daily Telegraph and the owner of the Spectator, that's the same person, by the way, put into persuading your beloved family members to vote for economic sanctions. I mean that. I know it sounds a bit glib, but they never ever forget the effort that was put into persuading people to vote for this madness. But I know you like to ring around and alert each other that it's on the horizon. So that will probably be landing at about 12 o'clock today, unless, of course, the flight is cancelled, in which case we'll have to talk about something else. Because I think, just to give you a bit of a priming, I think that Keir Starmer is getting it about right on this for reasons that I'll explain in a little more detail come 12 o'clock, but which can probably all get filed under don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And also, this is a generational problem now, not an electoral cycle one. Come 11 o'clock, a bit Groundhog Day, back to COVID. And probably still the question that most intrigues me. I got on, I don't know why I'm doing this today. I never normally do this. The grown-up presenters do this, don't they? You start the show with a quick run-through about what's coming up later. I normally just dive into what we're doing first. And even then I often hit the first break 4 or 5 minutes late. So goodness knows why I've decided to give you a quick heads up and digest about coming up later. Not least because I often change my mind. So we could do something completely different come 12 or indeed 11. But I noticed on the tube this morning, because I always come into work by public transport, what with being Jimmy from the block, I noted lots of people wearing masks again. I only really clocked it today. I don't know whether that was just an anomaly. The tube I get is often the one coming in all the way from Heathrow. So you have people, often you can tell who's coming from Heathrow because they're carrying large suitcases. And they often are more masked up lately than the commuters. That balance seemed to have tipped a bit today. I'd say it was 50-50. More people wearing masks, presumably because the numbers are getting worrying again, or the numbers are rising again. But we'll return to the two questions, really, of what we should be doing, and still the question that fascinates me the most. Why some people are still so, what's the word I want, triggered by the idea of wearing a mask or using hand sanitizer or whatever it may be. I think I've worked it out, finally, after, God knows, it's nearly 3, one loses track of time. It's several months, even years, since this nightmare started, and it is largely over, but we're having a little bit of a flashback now, which we should approach responsibly. But I think I've finally solved the problem of the relationship between your sort of pre-adolescent stubbornness, the sort of toddler refusal or reluctance to wear a mask or change their behaviours slightly. I'm not talking about the big stuff like the lockdowns and shutting businesses. I'm talking about the small individual things like staying 2 meters away from each other, wearing a mask, using hand sanitizer, changing our habits slightly. The sort of pre-adolescent stubbornness displayed by a surprising number of adults, the sort of, people who really hated being told it was their bedtime when they were 6 and haven't really changed much at all. The relationship between that and then the abject denial of actual science. I think I've solved it, so we may get on to that at 11. Speaking of science, though, we begin with fuel protests. Words are brilliant, aren't they? Because, how could I have phrased this differently in a way that remained accurate but made you think that Extinction Rebellion were back in the news? I could perhaps have said Motorways in Wales, Essex and Devon have been brought to a near standstill by protesters. In fact, let's try that. Okay, pretend you've just turned on the radio. Ready? Motorways in Wales, Essex and Devon have been brought to a standstill by protesters this morning. Right, what are you thinking right now? Right there. What is it? Bloody Extinction Rebellion, isn't it? That crusty, muesli-munching, sandal-wearing, armpit hair knitting even. Patchouli oil, swampy. Right, am I right? Were you doing that there? What? Because I don't know if you're allowed to have a different reaction today. I think you also have to be furiously angry with the people protesting not over climate change and fossil fuels' undeniable and enormous role in that process, but the people on the motorways today because they are cross about the cost of fuel. They are ostensibly trying to keep 2 lanes slow and the fast lane outside free, but even a relative newbie when it comes to matters motoring know that simply won't work. It's a rolling roadblock and it is obviously going to slow down those mythical ambulances that Extinction Rebellion protesters are always accused of halting or holding up in traffic. I love the smell of hypocrisy in the morning because presumably all of the people who are routinely queuing up to attack those who are trying to save the planet are also going to be queuing up to attack those who are trying to save themselves a few quid by deploying very similar tactics. And I wonder whether the government will now enact the new laws that they've brought in, essentially to target Extinction Rebellion type protesters, to go after these people who have brought motorways to a relative standstill in order to protest against the cost of fuel. So I'm, forgive me, philosophically fascinated by this question because I think, as someone who generally supports Extinction Rebellion, with a few reservations, which are pathetic because I'm about to say, with a few reservations when their tactics are particularly extreme, which translates as saying, I'm a supporter of their protests unless they're really, really effective and successful, in which case I tend to get a little bit hacked off with them. I'm philosophically fascinated by the question of whether you're allowed to have 2 different attitudes to this. Because I don't want to have the programme written by the hypocrites, but the general argument is when Extinction Rebellion glue themselves to Belisha beacons, the general argument is, well, I agree with their cause, but you can't be going around slowing down the traffic. You can't be going around disrupting the flow of traffic, with which I largely disagree. I'm not going to die on this bridge, metaphorically or literally, but I broadly disagree. I think if a protest is going to work, it has to inconvenience other people. It's like industrial action. Imagine if the railway workers were not going on strike, but were instead putting leaflets through your door a couple of days a month, calling upon you to support their quest for parity and decency in the workplace. It probably wouldn't be quite as effective, would it? Imagine if Mick Lynch was turning up on the radio just asking for your support, rather than justifying and explaining the industrial action that him and his members have undertaken. I mean, imagine if the suffragettes had never moved beyond saying, do you think we could possibly have the vote, please, chaps? Instead of taking increasingly serious, and of course in the case of the suffragists, even fatal for themselves, action. I mean, where is the protest? Where is the peaceful protest? Apart from Mahatma Gandhi, I suppose, but I don't have the history to comment in particular detail upon that chapter. Where is the peaceful protest that worked? We'd probably still have the poll tax, wouldn't we? If all the protests against that had been people. I say, oh boy, I'm a little bit unhappy with this old poll tax business. Any chance we could stick it in the old dustbin? No, shut up, go away. I don't know. I could be wrong. And also, as Ed points out, and I'm happy to reiterate, there are numerous videos of Extinction Rebellion protesters moving out of the road for ambulances and fire engines. But if you're a tub-thumping tabloid hooligan, you have to pretend not to know that, or you have to close your eyes when you're presented with evidence of it. Because what is the job of the tub-thumping tabloid hooligan? To turn everybody into an enemy for a day. The problem is that they lack the wit or the intelligence to realise that if Extinction Rebellion are the sworn enemy of all decent people on a Monday, when they slow down traffic or disrupt transport networks, then on a Tuesday, when it's people protesting against the cost of fuel, they, by rights, should have a target painted on their back as well. So I'm quite relieved today to find myself in a position where I can offer up moderate and modest support for both groups of people. Extinction Rebellion for trying to reduce the amount of fossil fuel in use, and fuel protesters today for trying to reduce the cost of the amount of fossil fuel in use. Talk to me. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. I think we'll start with the simple question, and possibly, depending on how you're feeling, because it is quite warm out and you might have had a heavy weekend, we might move on to the philosophical phenomenon that I find so fascinating. But we'll begin with this question. Do you approve? Yes or no? Doesn't get much simpler than that. Protesters have begun to target motorways in Wales, Essex and Devon in a demonstration over high fuel prices. Police have warned of serious disruption throughout the day. Protesters are calling for a cut to fuel duty, which is within the gift of government, but which, of course, is a government that is currently feeling the squeeze in almost every corner of fiscal responsibility. The protest began in England and Wales shortly after 7 o'clock this morning. Obviously, if you're caught in a bit of a roadblock, I'd love to know whether your thoughts change according to the level of inconvenience that is being visited upon you. But the second question, the third question is this going to prove my theory that no phone-ins about road-related issues are ever interesting? I do hope not. But the second question, very simply, is will it work? Do you think it will work? So we start with, do you approve of this? And then in brackets, because I think your opinion about this protest needs to be, if you're honest and logical, identical to your opinion about Extinction Rebellion protest, close brackets. Number 2, will it work? And number 3, are we about to spend 45 minutes proving once again that all road-related radio phone-ins are terminally dull? I'm hoping the answer to the third question is no, and that's not a question I'll expect you to answer when you ring in, which you can, of course, do by dialing 0345 60 60 973. And we begin, as we so often do, with an apology. I got the suffragists and the suffragettes the wrong way round. Frankly, it's a miracle they still let me do this every day. 10:17 is the time. Protesters have begun to target motorways in Wales, Essex and Devon in a demonstration over high fuel prices. The way my brain works, I want to know whether you can hold a different opinion on this protest than you would hold on Extinction Rebellion protests. 0345 6060 973. And then we look at the rights and the wrongs of this particular one, which is probably, for a Monday morning, an easier way into it. I listened to a protester being interviewed in the last news bulletin, in the 10 o'clock news bulletin. And I shifted in a way that I sometimes do when the facts meet my feelings. And I thought, can I really go on the radio and tell these people to wind their necks in and remember that they're disrupting, do essentially what other people do whenever Extinction Rebellion protest? I can't quite imagine what it would be like to lose your job because you can't afford the fuel that you need to do your job. I genuinely can't quite get my head around that. I know what it's like to be skint, but not in the sense of having nowhere else to go, not being able to. I've mentioned to you a few times, the skintest I've ever been was the week before I got married, when I suddenly realised I'd done my sums wrong and I was £1,000 down that needed to be paid on the day, but I could phone my dad. And, the days of your card being knocked back in the supermarket are just a matter of waiting until payday or having forgotten that you'd tied one on the night before and all the money had come out of your account just as you were wheeling your trolley around Sainsbury's. I'm not going to patronise you by pretending that I have a proper understanding of what that's like, but I'm not thick and I'm not devoid of empathy, so I can imagine it, and I'm blessed, if that's the right word, over the years to have had it explained to me. So that protester describing the loss of job as a direct consequence of fuel prices, in a rational and fair universe, wouldn't need to protest. Because if you got those stories front and centre, if you got enough people aware of just how acute this problem is now becoming for, to use that dreadful phrase, ordinary men and women, then I don't think the protest would be necessary. I don't know whether the government would do the right thing. The government is not really interested in anything at the moment but defending Boris Johnson against the latest evidence of his absolutely abject unsuitability for high office. One of the problems with having been pointing out his abject suitability for high office for much of the last decade is that when everybody else starts doing it, I almost feel as if we should find something else to talk about. That's nice now. That ball's up and running. Those plates are spinning. Everybody from the Telegraph down is going after Johnson now, so O'Brien can move on to something else. His work here is done. But I don't know whether or not the government would respond to proper pressure, to proper protest in the proper way. But I do know that there are breaking points. I interviewed Chris Patton recently about the poll tax, which he was charged, of course, with introducing. And there are points where the status quo can simply not be sustained. And that is the other element of this conversation that I probably should have introduced earlier. How bad is it? I mean, how normal would it be to hear from somebody who has lost their job because of the price of fuel? I'm a journalist who doesn't drive much, so the price of fuel affects me in the cost of everything I buy that is transported, but oddly it doesn't affect yet my public transport costs. They haven't gone up in order to accommodate the price of fuel, and I do almost all my travelling by public transport. Explain to someone who's not a petrol head and who very rarely drives and who is, as I've established, relatively comfortable in the sense that I'm not going to go hungry, however bad the cost of living crisis gets. I'm not going to be completely insulated from it, and I am going to notice it. But make my hair fall out, what's left of it. Go on, 0345 6060 973. Hit me with the story or the evidence that really will bring home, for people listening to this programme, why the cost of fuel is not just another story. It's not just another news item. It's not just another cost of living crisis bulletin. It's your life. It's your livelihood. It's your, if you like, your daily grind being transformed in ways that the rest of us probably need a little bit of help understanding. The number remains the same, whichever one of the 30-odd questions I've now thrown at you this morning you're minded to answer. 0345 6060 973. Jeremy says, I support the fuel protesters because they support my business. Extinction Rebellion want to stop my business. It's that simple. So, Jeremy, with respect, that's, complete selfishness. Extinction Rebellion trying to save the planet, but obviously, like most of us, you care more about your own personal financial situation, regardless of how many generations may suffer for however long in the future. But I get that. That's, you can support the fuel protesters using exactly the same tactics that Extinction Rebellion use. So, in fact, you're in favour of people having their businesses disrupted and having their livelihoods damaged by protesters, but not when it's not affecting you directly. That's the other element that intrigues me this morning. 0345 6060 973. And then, I guess, as we said, the likelihood of it working. Quite a few of you are telling me that peaceful protests can be successful. I don't know that I can remember anything like that. A peaceful protest being effective, where carrying a placard saying "down with that" sort of thing in the famous Father Ted incident. But the notion, if you like, of these people being able to achieve their ends without being disruptive. And disruptive, of course, is the word that appears in the new legislation that Priti Patel has introduced, although whether she brings it in with people who this might be unfair of me, lean a little bit more to a traditional Tory vote than others, I don't know. We will find out. So, those questions once again. Can you hold different opinions on Extinction Rebellion protests and fuel price protests? 0345 6060 973. How would you bring home to somebody not currently fully au fait with the scale of the fuel price problem just how serious it is and just how much it is affecting people? If someone losing their job directly because of the cost of fuel isn't enough to make you wake up and open your eyes, then I wonder whether anything will be. And finally, what does it, does it run even the vaguest risk of actually working? Do you envision a government turning around and saying, yeah, do you know what? We are actually going to exercise our right to lower the amount of VAT on fuel. We'll have to find the money that's currently raised from that from somewhere else during a cost of living crisis. but this is actually something that we are going to respond to. We've just introduced legislation to make this kind of protest more illegal than it already is, but we're actually going to respond to this protest because we quite like the sort of people who are unhappy about the cost of petrol. We don't like the kind of people who are unhappy about the cost of planetary crisis. 10:25 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. And I have to warn you, at the moment, it looks like the question I shouldn't have asked is likely to be answered in a fairly comprehensive way, which is, are phone-ins about road-related issues ever interesting? Because with the greatest respect of everybody who's phoned in so far, no would appear to be the most overarching answer. So rescue me from yet another conclusion that phone-ins about road-related issues are absolutely mind-numbingly dull, and tell me why you have a different approach, a different attitude to the Extinction Rebellion protest from the attitude that you have to protesters or protests about fuel prices. The number you need, and I really can promise if you hit the numbers now you will get through, is 0345 60 973. Huge investment in electric vehicles, charging availability, renewable energy and new tech would prevent much of this in the future, says Julie, leading me once again towards the conclusion that we should probably have built the whole show this morning around the idea of whether or not conversations about road-related issues can ever be interesting, because that's just kind of dull. Janie Godley's effective Trump placard on the golf course was kind of effective, says John. It wasn't really, mate. He still became president not long afterwards. End of last year near Junction 17 on the M25, says Bill, and I've almost already lost the will to live. All traffic stopped both ways. I was feeling that it was those pesky Extinction Rebellion, but it turned out to have been a road traffic accident, and I drove home thinking, there but for the grace of God went I. What would an effective protest look like? In the context of, this is where the Gilets jaunes came from, isn't it? It's where the yellow vests came from in the context of French protest. I just don't know if you ever complain about the cost of something, what you expect to happen, or whether or not the government are likely to act upon it. I'm going to admit defeat on my philosophical phenomenon this morning and say that I appear to be the only person in the country who's interested in the question of whether or not, if you are opposed to Extinction Rebellion protests, you also have to be opposed to cost of fuel protests. I think you have to have the same attitude to both. It's a question of whether or not you approve of the tactics, not the cause. That's what they do. They turned it into a conversation about tactics. So it doesn't matter whether you agree or disagree with the cause. You either find these sort of tactics acceptable and are to be encouraged, or you don't. So now I've got all 10 lines into the studio flashing, but still apparently nobody interesting enough to talk to, which is a terrible indictment of the height of the bar, and puts an enormous amount of pressure on Claire, who's in Leeds, to kick things off. Claire, first of all, am I right in thinking that radio phone-ins about road-related issues are an absolute waste of everybody's time?
I don't think so.
All right, it's all on you then. It's all on you now, Claire. What would you like to say?
This is the first time I've ever phoned in to a radio show.
Gosh.
And it's because of roadblocks.
Go on then.
And I'm terrified, but I'm not quite as terrified as I am about climate change.
Okay.
And I've taken part in those protests with Extinction Rebellion and with Doctors for Extinction Rebellion.
You're a doctor, are you?
Yes.
Okay.
But I just have this glimmer of hope that people who are taking part in these fuel protests are feeling angry enough to do something. And I think the thing that ties this together is just this inequality that we've seen over years and years and years. And people have had enough. A lot of the situation we're in relation to the climate crisis is also because of inequality. And
yes.
The fact that people are actually taking time off work, using time that they could be with their family, with their kids, to actually do something, gives me the tiniest bit of hope that this thing can be turned around.
So the engagement is what encourages you? The
engagement and the effort. To get up and to actually go out there and say, this is what I'm going to do today, because I need to do something to try and change the situation that many, many people are in.
Who are they talking to? Because I know who you're talking to, Extinction Rebellion. You're talking to me, and you're talking to government, and you're talking to everybody in between. You're essentially saying, please wake up, please open your eyes. This is epic. This is huge. Who are these people talking to?
I think they're mainly talking to the government to say, life is really, really hard for people, and it's getting harder and harder. And again, a lot of this is down to just the horrendous inequalities that all of us are part of at the moment. And things just seem to be getting worse. And finally, I feel like there's something in the air. There's something changing.
Up with this we shall not put. I mean, they're not massive numbers any more than the Extinction Rebellion protests are massive numbers. There's something a little bit, I don't know what quite the word is, because you're talking about equality and fairness. There's something that feels a little bit unfair about a relatively small number of people, however righteous their indignation may be, having the ability to inconvenience an unsympathetic or ambivalent large number of people. And that's another crossover between Extinction Rebellion and these fuel protests. How do you justify it? Well, I think I know how you justify it, but I'll ask anyway.
All of the protests have got a risk of a negative impact on people. That we accept. But we're doing it for, I hate using the word greater good, but it's to do with helping people down the line. And ultimately, the normal channels for this stuff hasn't worked. Council elections, government elections, petitions,
by-elections.
None of it is working.
No, I take that.
So protest is pretty much the only thing we've got left now.
And yet, in a sense, these people are protesting for a cause that could be loosely described as wanting more fossil fuel to be burnt today, and you, of course, protest for a cause
I'm not sure that's the case. They're asking for fairness. So,
but fairness is cheaper fuel, and that means more journeys. Vicky Stamper, the protester I keep referring to, lost her job as a lorry driver because they couldn't afford to fill the truck with fuel anymore. It became non-cost effective to send her out on the road. So if the cost of fuel comes down, that's another truck going out on the road tomorrow.
There's a difference between the short and the long term, and climate protesters are not suggesting that there is no oil tomorrow. We've got to do this rapid transition, and that means some sort of prioritisation so that people getting to work needing fuel take priority over private jets.
Beautifully put.
Just those sort of
in the olden days,
changes straight away to be made.
No, I keep talking over you when you're talking over me, but you started talking over me before I started talking over you, so you should finish before we go to the news.
Just that we can make some immediate changes. People getting to work need to be prioritised, potentially even subsidised, and we can stop private jets tomorrow from using that same fuel.
I hadn't thought of that. Do you know, in the olden days, Claire, I would have hated talking to Extinction Rebellion people because, and I mean this as a compliment, you've got an answer for everything, and that used to drive me potty, especially the sense that I might be being slightly untangled live on the radio. But these days, for some reason, I love it. I love the idea of you saying stuff that just makes me go, God, yeah, of course. Is that journey necessary? Is that journey necessary? Should we really be allowing people to fly in a private jet to Monte Carlo when they could get there with a much, much smaller carbon footprint? And then suddenly again, I finally use the word carbon footprint in a way that makes me understand exactly what it means. There was nothing to be scared of there, was there?
I've survived, I think.
We'll do it again. Thank you, Claire. And goodness knows how. You've done a better job than me of getting other people engaged in this particular conversation, although the suspicion remains that the lifelong aversion to having radio phone-ins about road-related issues is actually fairly well-founded in rationality. It's 10:33. My apologies, we're so late. Dominic Ellis is here with the headlines. 10:36 is the time. A special prize for anyone who can categorically explain how Brexit's played a huge role in this fuel price crisis, because the tanking pound, or the damage done to the pound by Brexit, the remaining damage done to the pound by Brexit, of course, weakens the pound in a market where everything is against the dollar, in a market where everything is priced by the dollar. I'm pretty sure that's kosher, but it might not be. So I'll introduce that to the conversation, although you won't be able to get through at the moment, which gives me an opportunity just to take a moment to pull back the curtain and show you the wizened old man pulling all the levers and talking into the microphone, as opposed to him being the great and powerful Oz. And I'm trying to think at what point in my presenting career I developed the confidence to tell you what I'm about to tell you now. So what was it, Keith? 23 minutes past 10, probably? Not a sausage. Few people had rung in, and with the greatest of love and respect, we set the bar quite high on this programme. You're not going to get on if you're just ringing in to moan about, I don't know, it's not the Metropolitan Police Force anymore, it's the Metropolitan Police Service, or that kind of thing that we've all heard a million times before. But there are moments, and 10:22 this morning was one of them, where you do find yourself thinking, do you think maybe we should let on the flotsam but no, we didn't, which meant that I was staring at the 1:30 news thinking, I might not actually. And now for some reason the switchboard is full. I don't know what happened in those moments. I don't know why they happen. But as Keith just pointed out, it keeps me honest. It's quite good occasionally to be reminded that the groaning, flashing switchboard that we have become used to in recent years is not guaranteed. It's never guaranteed. But obviously it's not my fault. It's because road-related topics are so fundamentally dull. But I will never give up trying to turn that oil tanker around and, with your help, make them interesting. Sarah is in Tyndrum in the Scottish Highlands. Sarah, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello,
Hopefully I'm not just the bottom of the barrel.
I've just we're top of the barrel now. That's the whole point, is that I was about to get cross with the producer for not putting through rubbish callers, but she insisted that we'd hold on until we got good ones, and here we are. What made you turn, what pushed you over the edge, just out of interest? At what point did you actually reach for your phone in the last 38 minutes?
Well, it just kind of, the whole issue kind of just got me thinking about it.
Right.
I mean,
down with that sort of thing.
Well, I don't know. It just kind of engaged me, really engaged me with the whole thing. And personally, I think that the protesters don't probably think there's hope in hell of them getting a fuel cut, price cut on the back of their action. And undoubtedly people's businesses and incomes will be affected by it, which is really hard. But actually, in the bigger picture, there's millions, the vast majority of us are all being affected by what is going on in this country right now, in one way or another. And there's desperate things happening because the country isn't being run properly. And I just think that last week, we saw Mick Lynch going up against all the politicians and kind of speaking a bit of truth to power. And look at what happened. Look at the support he got.
Yes, it took everyone it took the usual suspects by surprise, that, didn't it? Even with the predictable tabloid hooliganism, trying to portray him as, the greatest threat to the country since the Luftwaffe or whatever nonsense they came out with. Something landed. But that might be down to Mick Lynch's... But that could be down to his personal effectiveness rather than the broader climate issue.
For sure. But don't you think possibly it's ignited something in people that think, I need to be heard. I'm so frustrated. It's all so unfair. It's so bad. I need to, stick my hand up and I need to be heard. I mean, I'm not a phone-in, I'm being heard. I feel frustrated. So what am I doing? I'm phoning into you and having a rant to you.
Yes.
Without trying to use any sweary words.
Well done. It's to be encouraged. So I mean, that's odd then, because that almost pits people who wouldn't have a lot in common with each other. And I'm thinking, obviously, about Extinction Rebellion protesters and then people who want fuel to be cheaper. People who don't have a lot in common with each other having a common cause with the uselessness of the current government. And the unfairness that Claire touched upon as well.
I think this is kind of boiling up of people's frustration. You've got the teachers talking about going on strike. You've got the rail workers on strike. You've got chaos at airports. You've got government ministers appearing at speeches that they're paid to go to, and they've got speechwriters writing speeches, and they don't even know their subject. No. They get mixed up between rugby union and rugby league.
No one's that stupid. Don't be silly. Let's keep it within the realms of plausibility, Sarah, if we may, please. No one's going to turn up at the launch of the Rugby League World Cup and get it mixed up with rugby union. Not even our current culture secretary would be that daft. Oh, sarcasm.
So that's what I think.
No, I like it. No, I like it a lot. And thank you for not correcting my pronunciation. It's Tyndrum, isn't it?
It is Tyndrum, yeah. The locals, and there aren't many locals, but they definitely say Tyndrum, and it means, translated from the Gaelic, it means house on the ridge, because it's on the great watershed of Scotland.
Well, there you go. And this is becoming a constant source of embarrassment for me, my mispronunciation of place names, particularly in Wales and Scotland. And it reminds me of the late, great Harry Gratian, who passed away a couple of weeks ago, the Yorkshire TV presenter, BBC Look North presenter, who, among many things, got the pronunciations of every little village. And some of them are weird, like Kirby, for example, most obviously. There's a lot of Kirbys in Yorkshire, which you might pronounce phonetically as Kirkby Moorside. And one of the comments made when he passed away, and a great loss, a brilliant presenter. I've often thought that the long-serving presenters of regional news build a bond with an audience stronger than any other broadcaster, because they're part of the furniture when you're at home, and then they're part of home when you're not. And Harry Gratian really summed that up. And one of the many comments I saw after he passed away was about his grasp of the place names. It means a lot to people to get the place names right, which is why I wish that this was print rather than broadcast, so that I could just spell them correctly without getting caught out. Thank you, Sarah. Dave's in Hertford. That was nice and easy. Dave, what would you like to say?
How you doing, James? My parents live in London.
Yeah.
I live in Hertfordshire. They're both in their 80s. Mum's had knee operation, hip operation. Dad's had a quadruple bypass. And they've been on their own through COVID. So I like to go and see them a couple of times a week. It costs me £50 a time.
Gosh.
With congestion charge and petrol. If the family go down, if we go on a train, it's £100. So it's cheaper to go in a car.
Yeah, I suppose
So,
it is.
I don't understand how they can keep doing this, because the parents, I class that as essential travel to go and see my parents. So, I've got to do it twice a week, and I can't afford to do it twice a week anymore.
I mean, I'm not being brutal. I think you raise a valid point.
You're always being brutal.
Well, I know, all right. Give me a break in advance, forewarned. I mean, you could just transfer money into their account.
It's not about the money, it's about going to visit them.
No, I know, I get that, but listen, I visit my mum as often as I can, and I'm jealous that you manage to do it twice a week, but it's both, isn't it? I mean, you want to be there twice a week. At what point does it cease to be? I'm splitting hairs a bit. I'm just trying to...
It's ceasing at the moment because I can't afford to do it anymore.
So, well, there you go. So how often are you doing it at the moment?
Well, once a week if I can.
Yeah.
That's £200 a month, and that's just me going. It's not taking their grandkids to see them either. If I take the grandkids and we go in a car, it's the same price. But they say go on the train, but the train's so expensive.
No, I get that. What would it be? When was it comfortable for you? How much was it like a year ago?
Well, about a year ago, it was more or less just 20 quid.
It's gone up that much, has it?
Well, it's because they've put the congestion charge in within the North Circular Road. Is that the
ULEZ? That's the ULEZ. That's because you're in a...
the first one, the first
That's because you're in a diesel car, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, again, that's tough, but that's where Extinction Rebellion meets the fuel protesters as well. So let me put something to you. So you don't have much truck with Extinction Rebellion, am I right?
No, I think it's all good. Everyone can protest. Right. I agree with it all. All right, that's fine. But I class that as essential travel, going to visit my parents.
Yeah, I do too. I was just being a devil's advocate, and it is now beyond your reach. It's beyond your, and that's not something that's going to land with politicians, is it? Unless there is a protest like the one today. I want to visit my ailing elderly parents to make sure they're okay, and I can't afford it because the cost of fuel has gone off the cliff, has gone absolutely out.
Exactly.
I wish I could say something more reassuring than that. That is simply not fair. And I've been taken by surprise today by the way that the calls, when they finally came, have led us into the issue of fairness. I hadn't thought of that because my face is too close to the screen sometimes. I'm looking at the pixels instead of the big picture. A sense of fairness, a sense of a lack of representation, a sense that people are reaching a point where they feel they have no choice but to take to the streets, just as Priti Patel passes laws to make it much harder and much easier to get arrested on a whim, essentially, if you decide that you do want to take to the streets. I wonder how many people who are really feeling support for protesters today actually voted for the government that has made peaceful protest considerably more susceptible to criminal charges than it ever has been before. 10:46 is the time. It is 10:49 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. That's really interesting, that sense that fairness has come to the fore as a topic for conversation, and perhaps something I missed, the idea that Extinction Rebellion, if you could describe their cause as planetary fairness, and then the fuel protesters, which is actually social fairness. The idea that people are losing their jobs because of the cost of petrol, or people are unable to visit their elderly ailing parents because of the cost of travel, albeit that includes the ULEZ, which is designed to get diesel cars off the road within the North Circular. That sense of strain upon the status quo, strain upon the social contract is an even bigger issue than the philosophical phenomenon I was somewhat pompously trying to launch as a conversational topic earlier this morning. inevitably, there's now a debate about whether it's pronounced Tyndrum or Tyndrum, so I'm going to completely ignore that, Marjorie, and focus instead on Nicola's text. Nicola's been in touch to say, I can't wait until I next get through. I live in Cymru Kerry, I would say. Cymru Kerry. I'd have a go at that with my... Is that correct? Cymru Kerry? It's Welsh. I better not be a rude word. You better not have sent me a rude Welsh word that I've read out on the radio now under the illusion that it was actually a place name. Linda is in Staines. Linda, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi,
Hello,
James. Yeah, we've met before, actually, but I've never been on your programme before. But I felt really strongly about this. So I drive to work at the Afghanistan Central Asian Association.
Oh, yes.
Often to help refugees. I'm actually standing in a bridging hotel car park right now.
Gosh.
About to deal with 12 refugees that have joined a programme to learn English language. And what really concerns me is the price of fuel, because there's no public transport between me and where I work and these women. Oh. I'm the Director of Women's Empowerment for the ACAA. And normally...
Where did we meet? At the Kebab Awards?
No.
Where was it?
It was on your programme many years ago. I was a reporter on Tonight with Trevor McDonald, and I came in to do like a presenter's friend role or something like that. No,
sorry. I mean, how bizarre that. I thought we might have met at the Kebab Awards. It's just that there was somebody who works in a very similar field to you who came up.
That's quite funny.
Also, it's the only time I went out over the last 2 years during lockdown. The only time I went out was the bloody Kebab Awards. If you told me it was longer ago, I wouldn't have reached immediately for that. Anyway, we digress. Sorry, you piqued my curiosity there.
No, don't worry. Because I know Nick Ferrari quite well.
Right, you are. Linda Doobly.
Yes, I've been reviewing the papers and things like that. But anyway, back to the main topic. I got an email this morning saying that one of my really valuable volunteers who speaks both Farsi and Pashto, for those who don't realise that's the two main languages for Afghan refugees.
Oh, wow.
She can't afford to get to work anymore. That email came in at 9 o'clock this morning. And already the girl that ran our Afghan girls football programme had deep concerns. It was her first job out of university, and her parents were paying her fuel at that point. And they became more and more concerned about how much it was costing for her to get to work. I'm concerned because where I live, which is out in the sticks really, there's no public transport between where I live and where I work. So before it was 43 quid to fill up the tank. Last week I paid £67. Now, I drive around a lot. I drive to bridging hotels, I meet women, I do all sorts of stuff at the House of Commons, and sometimes I have no choice about whether I use the car, and it's costing an absolute fortune. My brothers have all given me tips on how to maintain tyre pressure and don't brake too often. I'm lucky I drive a hybrid car, all the rest of it. They're good blokes, my brothers, and they help me all they can. But working for a refugee charity, believe me, it doesn't, you're not minted.
No, clearly not. And so these two younger colleagues that you have literally been priced out because there's so much driving involved. They've been priced out of doing the job because of the cost of fuel. The
one this morning, definitely.
Right.
But what I do want to say is I understand this thing only came to me when it came to you about fairness, is because I've got 3 kids, none of them drive. They're very sort of very much environmentalists, and I listen to them all the time. And so my sympathies are often with Extinction Rebellion because, frankly, if a protest isn't hurting, it's not working.
That's a catchphrase there. How would your children, how would they get to where you have to be to today, though? That's the point, isn't it?
Well, I mean, one of them works with government, and he cycles in from Richmond.
Yeah, but he couldn't get to where you are today. He needs to make the journey you have just made to this bridging.
No, he couldn't, because he'd have to go on the motorway.
Exactly.
So he couldn't.
Exactly.
Yeah, he couldn't.
And
so it's hard on these kids.
and I mean, that's the point, isn't it? I don't know how loud these pips need to become. These squeaks need to become, rather, before the government notices. And I don't know even if they can. I mean, what does this government do? What does it stand for? I mean, they're trying to deport some of the people that Linda's looking after to flipping Rwanda at the moment. So the likelihood they're going to care about her inability to get there and help them is slightly off the scale. Where do we go? It's mad, isn't it? I've got a phone in this week Although, given how this programme started today, I'm probably not going to set myself too sophisticated a task in the coming days. But what does this government actually do? What is the purpose of this government? Apart from very creditably writing cheques for Ukraine, which is great, and long may it continue, but don't pretend for a minute that any other British Prime Minister would behave any differently, or that involves any particular effort or principle on Boris Johnson's part. He's still got millions of questions to answer about the amount of money that's rushed in to Conservative Party coffers from Russian sources, and we still don't know the full story about his decision to put the son of a KGB officer in the House of Lords. So spare me all the Ukrainian hagiography. What does this government actually do? What are they for? I think we might do that. But then again, if I thought it was a bit quiet at 10:15 this morning, how quiet would it be if I asked you what this government actually does? Thank you, Linda. Ashley's in Barnes. Ashley, what made you pick up the phone?
James, how are you? All right?
Yeah, I'm all right. Yeah, I'm enjoying it in the sense that it's always good to talk to people and learn stuff. But this is a pretty unpleasant conversation, ultimately, isn't it?
It is indeed. Yeah, I mean, I've got a business where I drive around to garages, providing tools and equipment for them to fix cars and vans and stuff.
Okay.
And I'm travelling from Portsmouth to London 5 days a week.
Right, that's a long way.
But yeah, for me, I'm closing down my business. I've opened up this year with an additional £750 a month with the ULEZ and fuel increases, and it's just, I just can't bear it no more. There's only so long you can keep going for.
See, when I ask the mayor about ULEZ, he always points out all of the help that was in place for people to replace their cars. But I presume, and I haven't checked this, I'm doing it off the top of my head, so forgive me if I've got this wrong, that's only for people that were living within the ULEZ zone. There's no help for you to replace your vehicle.
No. Well, we'd already replaced our vehicle. I had a 7.5 ton truck,
right,
which was DPF fitted and had blue.
Right.
It was Euro 5. Now, we couldn't get it converted to Euro 6. Even though we would have paid the £6,000, it would have cost to convert it.
So you couldn't do it, and you couldn't take the hit on replacing the truck entirely. So there was...
Well, no, we did. We ended up getting a van.
Right.
Due to we couldn't foresee the fuel price going up and everything else.
Right.
And it's just been hit from both angles.
So what are you going to do?
I'm applying for jobs now. I've applied for over 80 jobs. It's competitive.
Of course it is.
I've had a couple of no's so far, and
you'll be all right.
Left a bit hopeless, to be honest.
And is it a one-man band, the company that you're running at the moment?
Yeah, it's just me. And
that's it. It's game over because of the cost of fuel, essentially.
Pretty much, yeah. Yeah, that's it. You've got to look. You've got to see and try and look where things are going, and just understand that, you know what, before it gets too deep, just get out of why you.
Yeah, well, I mean, I wish again I could say something more reassuring, except that it sounds like you've made the right decision, because I can't see this thing getting better in the short term, and with the current lot in power, I can't see them really taking the actions that would be needed to help you, and they may well see you as collateral damage and something that needs to be done in order to ... I know not what the end game is or what the goal is. Ashley, mate, I'm really sorry to hear that, and again, it brings it home in granular detail how this is not a story about numbers in headlines. This is a story about people and livelihoods. Last word on this to Simon, who's in Reading. Simon, what do you think?
I'd just like to bring up the difference between Brian. Just like to bring up the difference between the Extinction Rebellion protest and this one. I think the Extinction Rebellion protest is sort of obviously climate change, which a lot of people accept but don't really understand or don't accept as being an immediate issue. Whereas I think the fuel crisis is just this current one, the fuel price protest, is just the beginning of what we're going to see for a while now, of people protesting about the cost of living. So I think we're in for. I
don't know that I needed that clarification particularly, but I understand your point. I mean, I don't think Extinction Rebellion is going away either. They're going to continue to protest. You just mean that it's easier to understand the grievance of the fuel protesters, perhaps, for some people, than it is the Extinction Rebellion.
I think the government is going to have to come up with some kind of waffles to say it's not to do with the protests, but it's because they're suddenly becoming really generous and they're kind and they're thoughtful. They're going to have to do something about it. Before we sort of end up with riots.
Just cut duty a bit, cut VAT, which they can do now, I think, in ways that they weren't able to do in quite the same way while we were members of the European Union. They could even sell it as a benefit. What would you do if you were in charge?
I would increase the minimum wage to start with. I think
you come at it from the other angle. And but then then you hear from people like Ashley, who admittedly isn't an employer except of himself, and he can't afford to keep afloat at all as a consequence of the fuel prices, and he couldn't afford to pay himself anymore. It's not as if there was a pot of money that he was not taking enough out of to sustain his own self. Simon, thank you everybody there. I shouldn't really do this stuff where I talk to you, because one day you're all gonna gang up on me and make sure I don't have anyone to talk to for the end. My first ever show on LBC. If you've ever seen one of my live events, you'll have heard this anecdote several times. My first ever show on LBC, it was an hour and 20 minutes before anyone rang in. Still keeps me awake at night, that memory. Up next, COVID's back. What should we be doing about that? And I mean really you. 4 minutes after 11 is the time. Grim news from Copenhagen. I generally, with events like this, leave it to the news bulletins to bring you up to date with what is going on and what has happened. So I will continue to do that. But any breaking news or new developments, obviously, I will bring to your attention that shooting, mass shooting in Copenhagen. Although, oddly, I'm not getting lots of messages today saying, why aren't you talking about the mass shooting in Copenhagen, eh? Oh, we all know your agenda. Why would that be? I don't know. Why would I not be getting messages today talking about the latest mass shooting to have unfolded in our world, which I tend to get with other, usually non-American. I don't know. It's a funny one there. 4 minutes after 11 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we turn our attention next, somewhat reluctantly, to COVID. I say somewhat reluctantly. I bought some hand sanitizer on Saturday. This is the content you come for, isn't it? I bought a knee support bandage as well. I know we've got lots at work, but I wasn't at work, Keith, honestly. And we got it at home and I've got it at tube stations, but I just thought I'm going to start carrying a little bottle. I'm going on holiday on Saturday, and the thought of not being able to, because I've come down with COVID, is a great leveller. And, of course, the numbers are concerning. Obviously, the widespread vaccination, and we remain a fairly well-vaccinated population, far from the best vaccinated population in Europe, regardless of whatever propaganda you may have swallowed in recent months. But we are a fairly well-vaccinated population. But cases have jumped by 32% in a week. To my shame, I'm still not 100% clear on how they know that, because... And I know it's an extrapolation. They haven't tested every single person in the country and then recorded all the positives. There'll be samples and multiplications. But an awful lot of people, of course, who've got it won't even be testing. But anyway, it's gone up by 32% in a week. That's UK COVID cases. Hospital cases and infections are also likely to rise. They're not as high as they have been in earlier highs, but there could still be an impact on treating other patients. So Dame Jenny Harries, who was not, I don't think, one of the public health professionals who completely covered herself in glory, which is probably why she got a promotion, while people like Jonathan Van Tam have walked away completely from having to work with Boris Johnson and his mates again, has said that people are being encouraged to go about their normal lives, but in a precautionary way, which I think I understand. Okay, well, I do understand that. It means that you will do things that you wouldn't normally do, even though you are living your life as normal. So you're still going to school or going to work or going to the football season's not on it, or going to the cricket or going to the pub. In fact, the last one's a problem, isn't it? What would a precautionary way look like when you were down the pub? I know the 2 metre distancing and mask wearing was commonplace for a while, but I don't think I've seen anyone wearing a mask in a pub for quite a long time. Not least because it always felt a little bit silly, given that you're in a pub to eat and drink. And therefore, every time you want to eat or drink, you have to take your mask off. So what's the point of putting it back on again? I mean, there are points, there are arguments. But 7 minutes after 11 is the time. What do you think that means? So about 2.3 million people are now estimated to have the virus. That's 1 in 30. If you are minded, either because you're an idiot, and I say that respectfully, or because you've just become a little bit more relaxed as a result of vaccination and the fact that means even when lots and lots of people get it, the impact is not going to be anywhere near as big as it was. But if you are of the view that it doesn't matter anymore, or that there's no need to worry, then, and when I say an idiot, I mean people who think it was a hoax or exaggerated or in any way embellished or whatever it may be. Idiot is the technical term for people like that. I've checked. I do think that we still, as a population, massively underestimate the impact of long COVID. I mean, I've had it in my life, very close to me, and it's a hugely debilitating issue, particularly for children. And I don't think that the science is yet able to reassure us that even having a relatively mild dose of COVID post-vaccination is going to insulate you from the incredibly long drag and slog of long COVID. So, I mean, reasons to be careful, even in a vaccinated population where people who get it are not going to be anywhere near as ill as they were previously. Reasons to be careful for me still include long COVID, very, 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 very much so. Des says Harry's statement is meaningless, and I'm grateful to you for that, Des, because you sort of kick it off as a phone-in topic. Go about your normal lives, but in a precautionary way. I disagree with Des. I don't find that meaningless because I have started taking more precautions now. I've never understood, and this was the original plan for the phone in this hour, but given how badly wrong I got it in the last hour, I might have a bit of a rethink before we hit the numbers. I still don't understand people who rejected the better safe than sorry argument. You know, like the sort of toddlers. The tantrum having toddlers who found the idea of wearing a mask. And I'm talking about adults now. I think there are issues for children and attendant questions that are slightly more nuanced or complicated. But people who objected to wearing a mask or social distancing or making the major but not life-changing differences to their own existence in the hope of protecting themselves and more obviously others from a potentially fatal infection. I didn't understand it at the beginning of this mess, and I don't understand it now. The people who genuinely didn't agree with the better safe than sorry school of thought on the relative, and this is where Jenny Harries has nailed it for us today, on exactly what she currently describes. They're going about your normal life, but in a precautionary way. So you're going about your normal life, but you're wearing a mask. You're going about your normal life, but you're keeping 2 meters away from people in pubs. You're going about your normal life, but you're, not doing everything you would have done before coronavirus became part of the national furniture. And that's what I want to talk about. So there's two elements to it, really. And we'll speak to an expert at the end of this hour. We'll speak to an expert at 11:45 about the science and about what we should be doing. But if you've got about 500,000 cases last week, according to the Office for National Statistics survey, driven by two new fast-spreading sub-variants of the Omicron variant, if you're interested, BA.4 and BA.5, meaning that about 2.3 million people in the country currently have it, which translates as about 1 in 30. And you have the Health Security Agency telling us that it doesn't look as though that wave has finished yet. So we would anticipate that hospital cases will rise. Hospital cases being, from the very beginning of this saga, the most important metric of how we are doing. Because, of course, hospital cases increase the likelihood or define the likelihood of serious illness and death, but also impact upon what an already beleaguered NHS can do in other areas. She thinks we're probably going to see a higher peak than we saw in spring with BA2 subvariant. Does anyone else hear the word barrackers every time I say BA, or is that just my very childish approach to life? No, it's just me, is it? Call it BA barrackers, everyone would be terrified. That's what the BA barrackers variant. We'd all be wearing masks and hand sanitizing. So the overall impact we won't know. It's easy to say in retrospect. It's not so easy to model forward. So what are you doing? I mean, what is going about your ordinary life in a precautionary way? And is anybody else like me getting a little bit, what's the word I want? It's not cross, because I think we've all relaxed. I'm pretty good at wearing masks, but I'm nowhere near as good as I was 6 months ago or 12 months ago. Getting a little bit irritated with people on public transport, which I wasn't a week ago. This new wave has just made me wonder why. I suppose I'm asking whether we think the government should do something now. We know that Boris Johnson hates doing anything, I mean, full stop, apart from philandering and lying, but he hates doing anything that we were describing a couple of years ago, almost every day on the programme, as providing clarity and leadership. I think the great tragedy of coronavirus, and one of the great reasons for our death toll, despite desperate and pathetic attempts by Conservatives to claim that somehow Boris Johnson did well or got all the big calls right, we know that isn't true. But the tragedy is that Johnson was one of the toddlers. Johnson is one of the people who hates being told what to do, who hates being required to abide by the network of obligations that binds us all, as his own teacher famously said when he was at school. And you don't really get that when he's doing the bumbling buffoon act. You don't really see the sinister side to his personality, that superannuated toddler who hates being told it's bedtime and who hates being told to eat his greens and who hates being told... and most of us grow out of that, even if we were like that as younger people. Some of us don't grow out of it until our 40s. Most people grow out of it at around the time of puberty. But a lot of the opposition to mask wearing or precautionary measures seemed to me at the time, and I'm certain of it now, built upon a hatred of being told what to do, a hatred of being told that it's bedtime, a hatred of being told to eat your greens. So I look at this and I think the government should do something. I just think it's such a silly and simple thing to do. And this is why I remain fascinated by people who found mask wearing to be an unbearable affront to their civil liberties. It would be such a simple thing to do now, if not to introduce a mask mandate, then simply to say that it would be a good idea. Instead of Jenny Harries going out, and I didn't see the whole interview, so correct me if I'm wrong, but instead of Jenny Harries going out and saying people should go about their normal lives but in a precautionary way, which, as Des points out, is open to the accusation of meaninglessness. But what does that mean? You want detail, right? Hand washing. Here it is. You should continue to follow sensible precautionary advice, highlighting hand washing, social distancing and wearing a mask in enclosed, poorly ventilated areas. So she went a little further than Des allows. But I don't think she's gone anywhere near far enough. And that's the question I'm going to ask you. So 2 questions now. Number 1, if 1 in 30 people have got it, then even if it's nowhere near as serious as it was in a pre-vaccination period, shouldn't the government be giving us some fairly clear guidelines on what we should and shouldn't be doing now with regard to coronavirus? And that's a straight yes or no. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. And the second question is the one that interests me eternally. Explain to me the people, whether you're one of them or not, and you probably won't be, but explain to me the people who had such a massive problem with precautionary measures, with mask wearing, social distancing, hand washing. And you're not allowed on this programme if you deny science. Sorry, there are, I'm sure, plenty of places in the British media where you can still get a warm welcome. But I'm not interested in what you read on your Uncle Keith's Facebook page and how it's all a plan to overtake the universe and turn us all into digital currency-based drones or some nonsense like that. I'm interested only in people who are otherwise relatively sensible, being the crucial word. What was that about? Am I being completely unfair when I say it is just like superannuated 6-year-olds who hate being told that it's bedtime? Or was there something else going on? That reluctance, refusal, anger almost at being asked to wear a mask? Because I think that might be part of the current problem. Part of the reason why the government won't come out and give us some proper, decent guidelines or even instructions at a time when 1 in 30 people have got it, which means some of them will get long COVID, and long COVID is an absolute nightmare. What should the government be doing? Because the reason why they're not doing anything will be partly down to the usual reasons. They're useless and far too busy dealing with the latest allegations of sexual misconduct to do anything with regard to a potentially lethal pandemic where the numbers are rising again. But also, I think that they're a little bit in hock to the superannuated 6-year-olds. If the Prime Minister is a superannuated 6-year-old, then the priorities of superannuated 6-year-olds perhaps get rather higher currency than they would do in a country governed by somebody relatively sensible. I don't know, but the questions are out there. Number 1, well, what do we think about that phrase? Go about your normal life, but in a precautionary way. 0345 6060 973. And before things get too bad, because if they do get bad again, and they're not going to get as bad, but if they do get bad again, I won't be having conversations about the psychology of silly people. But I think today we can allow ourselves a little bit of fun. How do you account for the person in your life who had such a massive problem with masks? 0344. What was going on there in your view? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. It's 11:18. Hit the numbers now. You will get through. 20 minutes after 11 is the time. Still got it. Thank goodness. Phone's ringing off the hook now. I want to give a quick shout out to Danny, or Daniel. I don't know if you are a Danny, a 46-year-old electrician from Leeds who has sent me the loveliest present. I get sent some amazing stuff these days. But this one really got me because I do often say on the programme, touch wood. And of course, there isn't any wood in the studio, no matter who's presenting. And so what Danny's done is make me a little block of wood with a little plaque on it, and it's got a little bit of Yorkshire history to it as well, because he's working in the old Burton menswear factory in Leeds. The building's coming down, I think, and there's a piece of original Canadian maple flooring from the factory that was built in 1921. And as he points out, it's perfectly possible some of my dad's family would have worked there over the years, which was implying 10,000 people. At its height. Not bad, he writes, for a Lithuanian Jewish man who came here not being able to speak English. Yep, he founded Burton's. These days he'd get deported to Rwanda. But he's made it. I love it. And thank you. And it means I've got it here in the studio. And so whenever I say touch wood, I'll be able to touch... I nearly said Danny's wood. That would be completely inappropriate. I'll be able to touch Danny's very neatly carpented... block. It is 21 minutes after 11. And speaking of Yorkshire, it was because I was speaking very fondly about one regional news legend who passed away a couple of weeks ago. There's another regional news legend who's doing his last broadcast tonight on Central News in the Midlands, Bob Warman, who is actually the regional news presenter that I grew up with, which gives you an indication of just how old he is. 75, born in Walsall, become one of the most recognisable faces in the Midlands. And tonight on the 6 o'clock regional news bulletin, Bob will be bidding farewell for the final time. So along with pretty much anybody else from the West Midlands who grew up watching Bob on the telly. It was ATV before it was Central as well. I wish him all the best for a very long and happy retirement. And I say it again, no one builds, even, we like to think we do on LBC, but no one builds a bond. No broadcaster builds a bond with an audience like the regional news presenter who does decades in the job, because you truly become part of the furniture and part of home as well when you're not actually in the region. Anyway, we digress. Back to COVID. We haven't had a COVID phone-in for ages, and guess what's coming up next? Bloody Brexit phone-ins. It's crazy. It's like Groundhog Day. It's like we've got in a DeLorean sports car, activated the flux capacitor and gone back in time. Jordan's in Haringey. Jordan, what would you like to say?
Good morning. It's still morning, isn't it? 11:23. 13 years listening, and it's only my second time calling, so please go easy on me.
Well done.
Yeah. So basically, I'm one of these people that really doesn't like wearing masks.
No one likes wearing them, Jordan.
Of course. Yeah, I completely get that. And at the beginning of the pandemic, I was very much avoiding them as much as I could. Against advice in some situations, which. This is why I say don't berate me too much.
No, okay. I'm holding fire. You realise that, don't you? I've just resisted the urge I've resisted the urge to dive in. So I'm going to let you say your piece. Go on.
I'm sure there's many people at the other end of the radio as well, also trying to, holding their tongue. But yeah, it all came down to the position that I was in. And I'm sure my father's position and his opinion doesn't help me. Didn't help me along my life either. Right. But it was all very much really poor timing and really poor, just a terrible time for this to come along. And
well, go on. What do you mean? It wasn't a good time for anybody. I mean, unless you're talking about sort of medical issues or something like that. But
it was just a long process of I'd spent a lot of money on training. I was training to be a commercial airline pilot at the time.
Right.
So I just finished spending about £30,000, and granted that wasn't the whole lot of the money required. So it almost got me at a good time.
Yeah.
But I just spent that money. COVID hopped along. Obviously, everything was shut down, socially, financially, everything was put on hold.
Right.
Indefinitely, potentially. And no one knew at the time, right?
Yeah.
So for me, it was just a case of, I feel like the world's out to get me.
Okay. I'm glad I held my tongue, because I really admire your honesty. This is the bit I get. I understand this. It's almost as if you felt that by not wearing a mask, you were almost somehow psychologically denying Brexit, not Brexit, denying God, there's a Freudian slip, denying COVID. It was almost as if I don't wear a mask, it's not that serious, and if it's not that serious, things will be back to normal quickly, and I'll be in the air, and I'll be back in my norm. Is that right? With some sort of subconscious psychological finger crossing?
It's almost like if I just pretend it doesn't exist, then maybe it won't after a little while.
Yeah.
And actually initially people were saying, this might last a couple of months.
Sure. Yeah, they were.
There was a 3-week lockdown initially. Obviously, it ended up lasting a lot longer than that, didn't it?
So what did you feel when you walked into an environment where everybody was wearing a mask?
See, I'm going back a long way now.
It's hard to remember. It's all a bit of a blur. I agree.
Yeah, and of course, my opinions have changed somewhat over the last 2.5 years as well.
Sure.
But initially, I went in, and to be honest, it would completely depend on their attitude. I'm being very honest right here to a lot of millions of people listening, I'm sure. It would depend on what their attitude was. If they were coming in and they were wearing a mask because it's for the good of the people,
right.
and it was kind of they were being advised to do it, and it was to help people, right? That'd be fine. I had a real issue with people that were pushing it on me. Per se,
again, I do admire your honesty, but that was the whole point. I mean, they do more good. Wearing a mask does more good for other people than it does for yourself. I mean, it's the whole, especially at the moment. And I know you've changed your view, but at the moment, the number of people who might have it without realising are the reason why we should all be wearing masks. But that idea, you mean you genuinely felt it was an affront to your liberty in a sense, an affront to your sort of freedom they talked about a lot.
I don't think it was to do that. I think it was exactly kind of, you hit it almost on the head, really, a nail on the head. With the case of, no, I just desperately don't want this to be a thing. This needs to go away.
Yeah, I can respect that. I mean, I don't agree with it, and I would have argued with you at the time, and I'd argue with you now if you still held that view. But I can respect that as a psychological process because I can get my head around it, and I mean, it involves a degree of delusion, but not a degree of dangerous arrogance, even though it might lead you to the same place as the stupid people or the dangerously arrogant people. Oh, this is awful. I hate it. Subconsciously, if I don't wear a mask, it might not be that bad. Because then it wouldn't, and I'm still alive. Yeah, I get that. But as you say, thank goodness you've seen the light. Getting quite a few messages like this, one from Sue, who says, I've just received a text from my vet to say they're postponing routine work to protect vulnerable people from COVID. They must have received something from the government, or perhaps they're just taking their own decision due to the rising COVID cases. How many times did I sit here, or indeed in my shed, and say to you, during the period Jordan's just taken us back to, where is the clarity and leadership? I think if you're expecting it to turn up this time round, then I've got a bridge I'd like to sell you. Pete's in Greenwich. Pete, what made you pick up the phone?
Well, James, first time caller.
Pete. Welcome.
And be gentle with me.
Always.
I saw Jenny Harris yesterday, and I wasn't impressed either. I think she said that she carried her mask in her handbag.
Right.
I think she said that she would put it on if she was symptomatic, which implied she was going out when she was symptomatic. And I'm not sure that's.
Are you sure? I mean, because I didn't see it, as I mentioned. So
well, that was the. Well, I can only take the implication that I got from it.
Fair enough. She's not here to defend herself, so I'm just putting that out there as a caveat, if you like.
That's fair enough. But the point I wanted to make, but I think the government, and I think Jenny Harris in particular,